People often think that when someone moves on silently, the other person doesn't notice or that it doesn't hurt. But let me tell you something, the mind never forgets what it had. And when you move on quietly, without drama, without confrontation, without giving them the satisfaction of tears or anger, that silence speaks louder than words ever could. He thinks, why didn't she fight for this? He wonders about the laughter, the little memories, the late night talks that suddenly feel like ghosts in the room. He remembers the good times, the love, the connection, and he starts asking himself the hard questions. He thinks, did I take her for granted? Because when someone moves on quietly, without chaos, it forces him to face himself. He starts seeing the choices he made, the moments he ignored, and the way he let things slip through his fingers. And that's a bitter pill for anyone to swallow. He thinks, I hope she's happy, but why wasn't it with me? Because love is about connection, not ownership. And when you leave silently, you leave with dignity, and that dignity is powerful. You leave behind no anger, no bitterness, just a presence that once was, and a life that's now moving forward. You see, most people think that if they move on from someone, they need to make a big scene. They think they need to scream, cry, post it on social media, make sure the world knows that they are gone, that they are done. But let me tell you something, that's not how power works. Real power doesn't announce itself with noise or anger. Real power moves silently, and when you move on silently, you say more with a whisper than they ever could hear in a yell. When you walk away quietly, without drama, without arguments, without showing pain, the message is clear. You valued yourself enough to put your happiness first. And let me tell you, that's a message that hits harder than anything else. When someone moves on silently, they're not trying to make the other person jealous. They're not trying to make them feel regret in a way that's loud and obvious. No, what they're doing is saying, without words, I don't need to chase what doesn't want to stay. I don't need to beg for someone's love or attention. I am enough on my own. And that is something people notice, even if they don't admit it. Because the truth is, when someone you cared about leaves quietly, it's like a mirror being held up to your own behavior. It forces reflection. It forces thinking. It forces realization that maybe, just maybe, they were worth more than you gave them. And let me tell you about the kind of silence I'm talking about. It's not cold or bitter. It's not meant to punish. It's graceful. It's quiet, steady, moving forward without fanfare. It's waking up one day and realizing that the person who hurt you or the person who didn't see your worth is no longer controlling your life, and you didn't even have to make a scene to do it. You just did it, and life kept moving, and they had to watch you grow from the sidelines. And that is louder than any argument. That is louder than any text you could have sent. That is louder than any social media post trying to prove a point. Because the truth is, when you move on silently, it's not just about leaving someone behind. It's about showing them the value of what they had without ever having to explain it. It's about showing them that you are not dependent on someone else to define your happiness. And I'll tell you something else. When they see you smiling, thriving, loving life without the chaos they caused, it shakes them. It shakes them more than words ever could. And sometimes that's when they realize what they lost. Sometimes that's when they think, I didn't appreciate her while I had her. I took her for granted. Moving on silently teaches a person a lesson that arguments and shouting never can. It teaches them that love cannot be forced, that respect cannot be demanded, and that when someone leaves without drama, it's not weakness, it's strength. And strength has a way of speaking for itself. When you leave quietly, when you move on with dignity, you are sending a message that is heard loud and clear. You are done waiting for validation from someone who couldn't see your worth. And you are ready to step into your own life, your own happiness, and your own power. And believe me, that message will linger in their mind far longer than anything you could have shouted. When you move on silently, you might think that the other person isn't noticing, that they're not paying attention, or that your quiet departure won't make a difference. But let me tell you something, it does. When someone leaves without making a scene, when they walk away with their head held high and without drama, it triggers something deep in the mind of the person left behind. Suddenly, all those moments, all those choices, all the little things they didn't see before come flooding back. It forces reflection. It forces them to look in the mirror, and that's not always comfortable. You see, most people avoid thinking about their mistakes. Most people avoid the uncomfortable truth that maybe they didn't treat someone the way they should have. But when the person they cared about moves on quietly, without any confrontation or tears, it's like a wake-up call. The silence says, I don't need to tell you how much this hurts me. I don't need to fight to stay in your life. I am choosing myself, and you should think about why you lost me. And when that happens, the mind starts working. It starts replaying moments, thinking about the times they didn't appreciate, the times they ignored, the times they could have acted differently but didn't. Reflection isn't just about remembering. It's about understanding. It's about realizing the little choices that led to the big loss. They start thinking about the words they didn't say, the apologies they didn't make, the moments they didn't fight for. They start questioning themselves, wondering where they went wrong. And sometimes that reflection comes with a sting of regret. But it's also a lesson they wouldn't have learned if you had made a scene or yelled. Loud emotions can distract people, can confuse them, can make them defensive. But quiet dignity, quiet moving on, it penetrates deeper than that. It forces them to face the truth about themselves. And here's the beautiful part. When someone reflects, they grow. Even if they don't say it out loud, even if they never apologize, the act of looking inward changes something in them. It plants a seed of awareness. They start to understand that love isn't just about being there when it's easy. They start to realize that relationships require effort, respect, and attention. They start to recognize the value of what they had before. It's gone. And it's not because you told them, it's because your actions spoke louder than words ever could. Reflection triggered by silent moving on is like holding up a mirror without breaking it. It allows them to see their flaws, their failures, their mistakes, without the chaos of confrontation clouding the picture. It allows them to ask themselves, did I take her for granted? Did I really value her presence? Did I do everything I could to keep this love alive? And even if they never admit it, even if they never reach out again, that reflection stays with them. It shapes how they see relationships in the future. It shapes how they treat the next person who cares about them. The truth is, silence is powerful. Moving on quietly doesn't just affect you. It affects them in ways that shouting or drama never could. It triggers a self-examination that can't be ignored, a moment of truth that can't be avoided. And that's why the person left behind often thinks more about your absence than they ever did when you were there. Your quiet strength forces them to reflect, and reflection is the first step toward growth, understanding, and real change. When someone moves on silently, it's amazing how quickly regret starts to creep in. People don't like to admit it, but regret is powerful. And here's the thing about regret. It doesn't come from loud arguments or dramatic goodbyes. It comes from watching someone you cared about walk away with dignity, watching them live their life without you, and realizing that they didn't need your approval or validation to be happy. Suddenly, they start remembering all the moments they could have cherished but didn't, all the times they should have listened but chose their pride instead. That's when regret hits hardest, because it's quiet, insidious, and personal. Regret often follows because when you leave quietly, you take all the chaos out of it. There's no fighting, no shouting, no crying to distract from the truth. They're left alone with their thoughts and alone with the reality that they might have lost something truly valuable. They start thinking about the laughter you shared, the long talks at night, the little things they ignored, those things they assumed would always be there. And when they see that you're thriving, when they see that you've moved forward without them, it's like a punch to the gut. That's regret, the realization that what they had was more precious than they ever understood. People often confuse regret with jealousy or anger, but it's deeper than that. Regret is personal. It's the quiet, gnawing thought that maybe they didn't deserve you, maybe they failed you, and maybe, just maybe, they let go of something that will never come back. And you know what? That's a powerful lesson for them. It's a reminder that love is not a game, that people who care about you are not disposable, and that the choices you make or fail to make have consequences. When you move on silently, without drama, you force them to confront those consequences in a way that yelling or begging never could. And here's the thing, regret doesn't have to be public for it to matter. It doesn't have to be shouted from the rooftops or posted on social media. It's internal, personal, and inescapable. Every time they think about the life you're building, every time they see you happy, every time they hear someone speak well of you or see you moving forward, that regret tightens its grip. They might try to hide it, they might try to ignore it, but it's there and it can't be escaped. And that's exactly why moving on quietly is so effective. You don't have to say a word, the impact is already happening. The regret is already forming. Regret also teaches them humility. It makes them pause and realize that maybe they weren't as attentive, as loving, or as committed as they should have been. They start to understand the weight of the moments they dismissed, the words they didn't say, and the love they didn't nurture. And that understanding, painful as it may be, is far more lasting than any argument or confrontation. It sticks with them because it's their own mind processing the truth. And there's nothing louder or clearer than that. The reality is, when you move on silently, regret doesn't just follow, it lingers. It lingers in their mind, in their heart, in the way they approach relationships moving forward. And the most beautiful part is that it happens without bitterness from your side. You leave with grace, with strength, and with the understanding that your happiness doesn't depend on their recognition. And that, my friend, is more powerful than any words you could ever say. You know, most people don't understand the power of dignity. They think it's something quiet, something soft, something that doesn't make a big splash. But let me tell you, dignity is stronger than anger, louder than words, and more commanding than drama ever will be. When you move on silently, when you leave without throwing tantrums or crying on their doorstep, you're showing a kind of strength that can't be ignored. You're showing that your value isn't dependent on someone else's recognition. And that, my friend, is one of the most powerful messages you can send without saying a single word. Dignity is about self-respect. It's about knowing your worth and refusing to settle for less than you deserve. When someone treats you poorly or doesn't see your value, the easy thing to do is react. The easy thing is to yell, to argue, to beg for attention, or even to shame them for their mistakes. But when you move on quietly, you're doing something much harder and much stronger. You're saying, I know my worth. I will not compromise my peace. I will not lower myself to prove a point or demand recognition. I will leave with my head held high. And that kind of strength, that kind of self-respect has a way of speaking directly to the other person's conscience. People underestimate how much dignity affects others. When you leave quietly, they start noticing things about you they never did when you were around. They notice your confidence, your calm, your composure. They notice that your happiness doesn't depend on them, and that realization can hit harder than any words ever could. They begin to understand that losing you isn't just about the relationship. It's about losing someone who carried themselves with grace, someone who refused to settle for less, someone who knew their value and acted accordingly. And that awareness, my friend, can shake a person to their core. Dignity also protects your peace. When you leave with grace, you avoid unnecessary conflict. You avoid the drama that comes with trying to prove yourself, and you protect your energy. Because here's the truth. The people who don't value, you don't deserve your chaos. They don't deserve to witness your anger or sadness as a way to manipulate you or make themselves feel better. When you move on with dignity, you take control of your own life and emotions, and you refuse to give them power over you. And that is strength on a level most people don't understand until it's too late. There's another layer to this too. Dignity commands respect in ways that shouting or complaining never will. When you leave quietly, when you show that you can handle pain, rejection, or disappointment without losing yourself, people see it. They respect it even if they don't admit it. And respect, my friend, is far more lasting than fear, anger, or guilt. Respect lingers. It makes people pause. It makes them reconsider their actions, their behavior, and even their understanding of who you are. And that, my friend, is the quiet, unstoppable power of dignity. When you combine dignity with moving on silently, you are unstoppable. You are showing strength, self-respect, emotional maturity, and wisdom, all without a single dramatic gesture. You're teaching a lesson not by confrontation, but by example. You're saying, I am valuable, I am enough, and I will not compromise myself for anyone who cannot appreciate me. And that lesson will stay with them longer than any argument, any accusation, any desperate plea ever could. You see, when someone moves on silently, it's not just about leaving the past behind. It's about giving the other person a chance to grow. Most people don't understand that. They think that if you leave quietly, it's like nothing happened, that it's just a fade into the background. But the truth is, your silence forces reflection, and reflection often leads to growth. When they see you living your life, thriving without chaos, without fights, without tears, it makes them confront their own shortcomings. They start asking themselves questions they never wanted to ask. They start thinking about the way they treated you, the things they could have done differently, and the opportunities they let slip away. And that, my friend, is how real growth begins. Growth comes from awareness, and awareness comes from seeing the consequences of one's actions. When someone leaves silently, they are holding up a mirror without saying a word. The mirror reflects all the mistakes, all the missed chances, all the ways they may have taken you for granted. And it's not the kind of reflection that shouts or blames. It's quiet, undeniable, and personal. It's the kind of reflection that says, I need to look at myself. I need to learn. I need to change. And that's powerful because people rarely grow when they're being told what to do. People rarely change when they're being pressured. But when they see your strength, your dignity, your forward movement without them, it lights a fire in them to examine themselves and their actions. Growth also comes from realizing the cost of their choices. When you move on without a scene, they start to understand that love, respect, and loyalty are not automatic. They start to see that ignoring someone's worth, undervaluing their presence, or taking them for granted has consequences. They begin to see that life moves on, and if they don't change, they might keep losing people who truly matter. That realization can be uncomfortable, even painful, but it's necessary for growth. Pain, when met with reflection, teaches lessons that comfort never could. And your quiet departure creates that space for learning. Another thing that silent moving on does is it models growth for them. When they watch you handle the situation with grace, composure, and strength, they see an example of emotional maturity. They see how you prioritize your happiness, how you protect your peace, and how you move forward without bitterness. And that example can inspire them to do the same, not just with you, but in every area of their life. It's hard to ignore someone living well and handling themselves with dignity. That alone is a lesson in personal growth that no argument or confrontation could ever teach. And let me tell you something else. This growth isn't just about regret or learning lessons, it's about transformation. When someone reflects on their mistakes, and sees the strength in the person who left. They start to understand how to be better, not just for you, but for themselves and for the people they care about in the future. They start to see what it means to respect others, to value relationships, and to take responsibility for their actions. And even if they never reach out, even if they never admit it, that seed of growth is planted, and it will shape the way they approach life and love from that moment forward. When you move on silently, you are doing more than leaving a relationship behind. You are creating a space for reflection, learning, and growth. You are showing, by example, what it means to handle life with dignity and strength. And that impact, my friend, is deeper than any words could ever reach. You leave not just a memory, but a lesson, quiet, powerful, and unforgettable. Closure is one of those things people chase, but rarely understand. Most folks think closure comes from shouting, from yelling, from arguing, from trying to make the other person see the pain they caused. But that's not closure. Real closure doesn't need an audience. Real closure doesn't need applause or validation. Real closure comes from within, and when you move on silently, you achieve it in a way that is both powerful and transformative. Leaving quietly gives you the control, the peace, and the dignity that no argument ever could. You're closing a chapter without opening another battle, without dragging the past into the present, and without giving anyone else the power to dictate your emotions. When you walk away silently, you're sending a message without saying a word. You're saying that your life isn't dependent on someone else's approval, that your happiness isn't tied to their acknowledgement, and that your peace isn't something they can disrupt. And that kind of closure is liberating. You're not looking for answers. You're not looking for apologies, and you're not waiting for recognition. You're done with the drama, the chaos, the hurt. You're moving forward, and the quiet power of that decision is more impactful than any conversation ever could be.